Last year when DJI released the Mavic Air 2, there was one reason that I didn't keep it, and that was the lack of 10-bit color. But with the Air 2S release, hey, if you don't know me, my name's Jake, and I create content to help solo creators on the go. So I test and review equipment here in Alaska, and I do tips and tutorials on how to use that equipment so you can tell better stories and make smart decisions. Last year when DJI released the Air 2, it was a fantastic, small, compact travel drone that had lots of capability, lots of features, but it missed one thing that I needed to keep it, and that was 10-bit color. This year they've released the Air 2S, which has 10-bit color, a 1-inch sensor, will shoot up to 5.4K, take 20 megapixel stills. There are a lot of specs out there. I'm gonna hit the highlights and some of the best specs of this drone, but there are probably a lot more that I'll miss. First off, this has a 31-minute flight time according to DJI, but I've been finding that it's more 25, 26 minutes is pretty much about what I get, which is still really good. If you have 3 batteries, that's almost an hour and a half of flight time. It's fantastic. 1-inch sensor, shoots up to 5.4K in 30 frames a second, shoot 4K 60, which is fantastic. It'll shoot slow motion 1080 at 120 or up to 120, which is good. It's not as high as the Air 2, which went up to 240, but I don't really shoot slow motion anyway. The most I would do is 4K 60. Has upward, forward, rear and downward facing obstacle sensors, so no side sensors, and it comes with OcuSync 3, which is, or O3, which is their newest sort of signal link, and it's really strong, very good over long distances, even way further than you can fly line of sight. But it does do something that having a stronger signal, having a more reliable and robust signal is really good, because if you're flying around trees or where objects might be coming between you and your drone, the chances of you losing video signal or losing control signal is a lot less. In my testing, it has been fantastic, rock solid, and it seems like a lot lower latency than OcuSync 2, which was also a really good system, but they've definitely improved upon that. It also has APAS 4.0, so a little bit more intelligent flight features as far as finding its way around and through obstacles. I've found that the obstacle avoidance works well overall, and the APAS works well overall, but it's not as consistent as something like, say, the Skydio. That's a sort of quick rundown of the specs. There are lots to cover, but mostly we want to jump into the strengths and weaknesses of this drone and hopefully decide if this drone is for you. To start off with the strengths, we've got to talk about the image quality, because the image quality from this drone is fantastic and really clean. One thing they did with the video is up the bitrate to 150. Higher bitrate gives the video more information, which is nice, especially if you're shooting in D-Log and 10-bit color and you want to color grade. Because this has a 1-inch sensor, it works really well in low light. I shot all the way down to ISO 800, and it was, yes, there's a little noise, but it cleaned up really easy with neat video in my editing program. So that is that's a really welcome change from the Air 2, because you can shoot sunsets, you can shoot after sunset, and still get a really usable image in pretty low light. Because you have a 1-inch sensor and a 20 megapixel sensor, you can crop in and not lose any resolution and still be able to shoot 4K. So they've given us up to 4 times crop in 4K, which is essentially cropping in 4 times on the sensor and giving you a really powerful zoom. And that is fantastic for shots that you want a lot of parallax in, especially if you're orbiting around something, or if you want to get close to something, feel like you're close to something, but not get close to something. If you're, filming wildlife or something like that, it gives you a lot of zoom range that you can punch in. The 2 times zoom range is fantastic. The 4 times I feel like gets a little tiny bit soft, still usable for social media and website stuff, but not as crisp and as clean as the not zoomed and the 2 times zoomed. My favorite and the standout feature is the fact that now this can shoot in 10-bit color, which is the biggest reason I didn't keep the other Air 2. but now that it shoots in 10-bit color, it's fantastic because it gives you tons of range to color grade with. It just gives you a lot more depth in the color and a lot more information in the video to be able to adjust and manipulate the video in the ways that you want. And on the video front, the fact that it now shoots up to 5.4K in 30 frames a second, up to 30 frames a second, is fantastic because the 5.4K is really crisp and really clean, and I have really enjoyed shooting with it in the 10-bit D-Log codec, which is fantastic. So on the codecs, you can shoot in 10-bit D-Log, which is a great codec. I love it. It's pretty much all I shoot with on something like this or my Mavic 2 Pro. You can also shoot in HLG, which is a really wide dynamic range profile, but a little bit like a log footage as well. And then you can shoot in the standard color profile, which is pretty good. It just doesn't give you as much information as something like the D-Log does. One thing that's interesting though is you cannot active track in 5.4K 30, 25, or 24. You can't active track in 4K 60. You can only active track in modes up to 4K 30. Another interesting thing that I found that I didn't realize or didn't read about or see anywhere else is that you cannot use the zoom, the punch-in feature, on anything other than the normal standard color profile. You can't use it in HLG and you can't use it in D-Log, at least not yet. Maybe they'll open up that option as something in the future, but right now you have to use the normal color profile to be able to do the punch in, zoom in. And as far as active track modes, just like the Air 2, it's all built in. You select a subject, you select whether you want a spotlight mode, which means you fly the drone any direction you want to, and it will keep your subject in the frame. It's really fun if you're a solo creator and you're filming yourself. Or you can have it trace you either from behind or do it parallel, where it'll fly alongside of you. You can do the trace mode, will be from the front or from the back. And then it has the regular droney, helix, rocket, circle, all of those sorts of different modes, which are all nice, smart features, smart shots that it has. And in active track, you can also do POI or point of interest mode, which means it sets a point and you can have the drone automatically circle around something. You can control the speed at which you want it to circle around, and that's a really nice feature to get really great smooth shots with lots of parallax movement. It does have a hyperlapse mode, which is really cool for if you want to get sort of the fast motion fly-through feeling of it. There's a lot of different options for the way that you can do hyperlapses. And one of my favorite things about this is the new Master Shots feature that DJI has included. Because if you're somebody like me, you film yourself a lot of times and you want to get just a nice mix of great drone shots, using Master Shots is a great way to do it. Now, a lot of people have had issues with the props showing in their Master Shots. I've seen that here and there, and so it's kind of hit or miss. It's something I think DJI will be able to fix with a firmware update or something like that in the future. But the nice thing about the Master Shots is, one, you get the kind of edited down file, which is great, but you can also use the entire 2-minute or 3-minute, depending on how you set it up, section of the Master Shots and edit it down yourself. But it just gives you a really nice variety of different kinds of shots that you can use. Whatever subject you're filming, you've got a whole bunch of options for different shots. The 20 megapixel stills are fantastic. They're really clean image, especially if you shoot in RAW. You get lots of information to work with. You can do a lot with it in post in something like Lightroom or Photoshop. You can manipulate the photos quite a ways. The nice thing about 20 megapixels is it's not so big that you have a lot of information or a lot of memory that you take up, but it does give you enough of size that you can crop in a little bit if you need to in post. This is at a smart photo mode, which is really nice. It'll do 360 photos, it'll do big panoramas, which are really nice, and because it's 20 megapixels, you get lots of detail, really nice photos. Really great. You can do auto exposure, you can do timed shots if you want to, and you can do multiple shots too, which gives you a lot of options for different photos that you want to take. Some of the other strengths of this drone are it's a really stable platform. It's very easy to fly. It's really responsive to how it flies. I don't know what DJI has done to work on the programming and the algorithms of how this thing responds to the controls, but it feels very locked in. One of the most locked in and stable drones that I've flown, period. It's just really easy to control where you want it to go and what you want it to do. And the gimbal handles everything I've thrown at it in sport mode or not. And that's one of the things that I really like about this drone, is the fact that you can fly in sport mode and the gimbal can pitch all the way up and it won't bottom out. The Mavic 2 Pro would constantly drop down because it was just too much. The original Mavic Air did, the Air 2 did a little bit, but this does not at all. I can fly at full sport mode forward as fast as I can possibly go, and the gimbal will stay perfectly level with the horizon, which is a massive deal because I end up flying a lot at full speed trying to capture boats or whatever I'm trying to film, and if the gimbal is dropping around, it has ruined so many shots for me. With this, that's not a problem. Some of the other strengths is I've flown this up to 42 miles an hour, which is really fast. It's not quite as fast as the Mavic 2 Pro, but definitely fast enough for almost anything that I'm gonna do. And we come to the APAS system and the obstacle avoidance. The obstacle avoidance has been upgraded. It definitely does a better job. It does a good job. The APAS system does a good job of finding a flight path around obstacles or under obstacles because it has the new upward facing obstacle avoidance, but it's still not quite on the level of something like Skydio. That's still way beyond anything that anybody else has put out there. But this does have good obstacle avoidance. Another strength of this is Active Track. The Active Track system in this does a very good job. I've had no issues with it. My Mavic 2 Pro would kind of close in and pull back and close in and pull back sometimes with the Active Track, depending on how contrasty the scene was. This I haven't had the same issue with. It's tracked me really well from behind, even from in front and from the side. I've been really impressed with how well it's Active Tracked me through a lot of different situations and a lot of different lighting conditions. And another strength of this drone is with the new control system with OcuSync 3, which is really good, really strong. They've put 4 antennas in here, which means you should have better signal penetration and good signal length. And one more thing that's strength, but it's also interesting, is they really increase the descent and ascent speed of this. I think they pretty much just turned it all the way up, because when you want to come down in a hurry, this thing drops like a rock. I like it, but it's a little unnerving at first because it feels like the motor's shut completely off. It really does come down that fast. And just like the Air 2, this drone is really quiet, and the noise that it makes, the sound that it does make, is not a harsh sound, not a bad sound. It's just kind of a low hum. And we talked all about the strengths, so we do need to cover a few of the weaknesses, which there are a few, although they're mostly massive improvements over the Air 2. This is a little heavier, and the flight time is a little less than the Air 2, so if you want the most amount of flight time, you still need to go with something like the Air 2, but you know, a few minutes less is not a big deal for me. In my book, it might be for you. Also, according to DJI, this is not rated to go as cold as the Air 2 was. I've not been in super cold situations because we're into springtime now, so I guess I'll have to wait till this winter to see whether or not this drone can handle the cold as well as my Mavic 2 Pro or the Air 2. But my suspicion is that it'll do okay so long as you take some of the precautions necessary to run drones in cold weather. Another weakness or something you need to be aware of, there are no side obstacle avoidance sensors, so anytime you're doing orbiting shots, flying to the side, which is one of my favorite types of shots to get with drones, you've got to be aware of your surroundings and make sure you're not going to run into anything while you're flying around, because it will run into whatever it's flying around sideways with. Another weakness is the obstacle avoidance itself, the APAS system. It does have to have pretty good light to work well, and I've noticed that it's a little inconsistent on how well it works. Like you can see here, I almost ran into that branch. Fortunately, I was keeping an eye on it when I was trying to test out the APAS system and found it. I can't figure out why I didn't see the branch, except for that it just wasn't a lot of contrast between the branch and the snow. So maybe that was the issue. Most other things it seemed to avoid well, but the APAS system, the obstacle avoidance, again, I wouldn't trust it 100% just because I think you should always be aware of what you're flying around and aware how close you are to objects. And one more weakness, or thing that at least is not a strength, is this gimbal, which, while it is a strength because you can fly forward faster without bottoming the gimbal out or covering it with this, it does stick out a lot further. And so if you wreck, this gimbal is not protected well at all. So if you wreck to the front, you're likely going to hurt your gimbal. A couple of things to note: you can use the same propellers as the Air 2, you can use the same batteries as the Air 2, and you can pair this with the smart controller. When pairing with the smart controller though, I feel like the video feed is a little bit laggy and maybe just not quite as good as when you're using the remote that comes with the drone. But if you want to use the smart controller, you can. And at the time of this recording, DJI has not said whether or not they're going to make it compatible with the FPV goggles that they release with the FPV drone or the motion controller. So I guess we'll have to wait and see if they do. Hopefully they do, because I think that would be fantastic, but at this time, they definitely haven't yet. For me, this has become probably the ideal drone that I'm going to be taking with me everywhere because of what the functionality of the photos and the 10-bit color give me. along with the flight time and the strength, the performance of this drone is just fantastic. So it's still small and compact, it's still relatively lightweight, it doesn't take up a ton of space in my bag. It gives me all the performance of my Mavic 2 Pro except for the variable aperture, but I'm okay with that using ND filters. I can do a good job there. And unless you're doing a really dynamic scene where the lighting is changing constantly, you can get away without an actual variable aperture. I put together a short playlist right here of some of the settings that I use for the Air 2S and my favorite accessories. Click or tap there. I'll see you in one of those videos. As always, if you have questions, ask me in the comments below or join my live stream on Wednesday nights at 4 p.m. Alaska time, 8 p.m. Eastern. We just have a mile of picking our way through a bunch of crevasses to get home. Hopefully we'll see you again soon in the next video. Cheers.